At the same time Lith was fighting with Orpel and discovering spirit magic, Elena and Raz were returning to the house and, upon hearing Lith's desperate cries, they hurried back to check on him. When they found Orpel on the ground with puke all over him, they had a clear picture of what had happened. For quite some time, they had been suspicious of Orpel's behavior, because every time he had to feed Lith, the baby would be hungrier than usual. Now they had solid proof. Remains of the undigested soup were scattered on the floor, clear as day. Raz was enraged. He was about to yell at Orpel, but had to stop because his other children had just come back as well. "I'm very disappointed in you, Orpel," Elena said as her husband was too angry to speak. "From now on, Elena will be the only one feeding Lith. You can take all her shifts in the stable," Raz said to Orpel. "I don't think even you can eat hay." Orpel tried to defend himself, to no avail. He hated cows and the way they smelled. "And that's not all. Elena, prepare one more bowl for Lith and take it from Orpel's share. He must learn that his actions have consequences," Raz yelled. Lith didn't quite catch all the words his father had said, but he saw Orpel turning pale and smiled. It was good news for him. Orpel cried and apologized, but Lith cried harder, commanding the attention of his parents. Elena and Raz ignored Orpel's pleas and sent him to take care of the animals. After eating a generous amount of soup and milk, Lith was finally able to focus on what had happened. After days of experimenting, trying, and failing, he grasped the basics of his abilities and gained a deeper understanding of magic. Lith had discovered that to cast an elemental spell, he needed to go through a 3-step process. First, he produced core energy. Then he mixed it up with the world energy he was trying to manipulate. The final and hardest step was controlling the spell and its effects. However, spirit magic was different. It skipped the second step and only needed Lith's own energy. That made it more difficult than the common form of magic he'd practiced so far, and also it was more time and energy consuming. Spirit magic also required a lot more focus than common magic. Pure energy had no physical form, so he couldn't rely on his eyes to manipulate its effects. Everything depended on his willpower and imagination. The clearer the mental image he had in his head, the better the results. Spirit magic also had its drawbacks. For once, its range was very small, barely reaching a distance of a little over 3 feet. Despite its limitations, Lith only focused on practicing spirit magic. By doing so, he discovered that every time he improved his spirit magic technique, he also improved in all other types of magic. He didn't need to split his focus and practice them separately anymore, so his improvements became bigger and more noticeable than ever. From time to time, he used a random elemental spell to check on his progress, and he had reached a deeper understanding to that element's true nature. These improvements also made Lith's breathing techniques better. Through accumulation, he perceived how his energy core changed in size and expanded with each training session. Also, he had a rough visual of the amount of energy his body contained. By using accumulation, he fed the world energy to his core, allowing it to expand from the size of a pinhead to that of a glass marble. Once the energy core grew to the size of a marble, further progress was only achieved when the physical body compressed the core back to a pinhead. Lith had no idea how the phenomenon worked, and had no way to go around it. Energy core and body development had to go hand in hand. There were no shortcuts. Bottlenecks happened from time to time when Lith used accumulation while the energy core was still at its peak. The world energy would be rejected by his core, which would become out of control and damage his body. But by continuously training in expansion and compression cycles, his energy capacity was already miles ahead of the one he had when he was born. With spirit magic, Lith had better control of his internal and external energy. He also modified the invigoration technique so that when he breathed in the world energy, he combined it with his own and temporarily exceeded his own limits. Then he expanded the resulting energy, moving it from the solar plexus outwards until every part of his body was overflowing with energy. With invigoration, Lith also noticed many improvements in his body and immune system. For example, He rarely got sick and could resist extreme temperatures. When his whole family would catch a cold, he would either be better before the symptoms manifested or quickly recover in a few days. Improving invigoration is the only resource I have right now to temper my body, and I can use it as a crutch until I get big enough to do physical activity, he thought. Hopefully, it could also help me overcome my bottleneck periods faster. It's a gamble, but it's worth a shot. Besides, it's the only thing I can do as a 7-month-old baby. Moreover, his family life experienced some changes during the following months. After the soup incident with Orpel, a divide had opened between the brothers. Lith was vengeful by nature, and so was his brother. When he was angry, Orpel retorted by calling him Leech instead of Lith, Orpel's favorite nickname for him. But every time he said it out loud, it would cost him a serious scolding, and when he used it when arguing with his parents, he would also get a good spanking. Orpel blamed Lith for all of his misfortunes. The little runt always laughed when he was having a hard time. In contrast, the relationship between Lith and his parents kept getting better and better. He had already started babbling basic words, making sure to say mama when Alina embraced him and dada whenever Raz came near him. If this world is even remotely similar to the one on Earth, it would be better to stay on my old man's good side until I'm self-sufficient, he thought. He was still afraid of father figures, and the two of them had a distant relationship. Raz was always busy with something, so Lith spent most of his time with Alina and Reyna, who took good care of him. To be fair, Raz mistakenly thought that Lith was too little to notice his absence and lack of attention. He was sure that he would have time to create a close relationship when he got older, just like he had done with his other sons. Raz did love Lith, though, and was constantly amazed by him. He couldn't remember a time when he would cry for no reason, not even when Lith was teething. When Lith was asleep, or pretending to be, he would not make a sound or raise his voice at all. Lith was also very fond of Rena. She was more like a loving aunt than a sister to him. He could see himself in her, taking care of her little brother just like he did back on Earth with Carl. He would have loved to be more affectionate towards her, but all he could do was smile and laugh as soon as he saw her. He also called her Lala, the only one with a Babel name aside from his parents. It wasn't much, but it meant the world to Rena. Time went by. When he was 8 months old, Lith was put on the ground for the first time. He started crawling under strict supervision. When he was 9 months old, he started walking, and his babbling words became real ones. He was finally able to speak. On the day of his first birthday, something that also existed in this new world, he used simple phrases and made some questions to complete his vocabulary. Since he knew nothing about how babies behaved, it was very stressful finding the right time to do a thing or speak a new word. So, he resorted to cheating to find out the proper time to learn something. He already understood most of what he heard, but he was always open to new things. If Alina was eager for him to finally say mommy instead of mama, he waited a couple of days before making it happen. If Raz encouraged him to run towards him, he obliged. The hardest problem was paying attention to everything Raz, Rena, and Alina said while appearing completely oblivious to their words. Another issue was that once they let him roam free in the dining room, they also gave him small wooden toys and expected him to play and explore his surroundings. Lith already knew the dining room like the back of his hand. Still, he had to pretend to be curious and naive about it. That was the hardest thing he had ever attempted since reincarnating as a baby, and it scared him to death. He had no clue how a toddler would explore such a bland environment, and his paranoia about blowing his cover made him very anxious. Seeing the expectation in their eyes, he went to the nearest thing, the fireplace. The fire was not lit and the logs were cold and covered in ashes. When he reached out to touch them, Raz stopped him. "This is the fireplace. Right now, it's safe, but fire is bad. Fire hurts. Never touch it," Raz told him. Lith looked at him, appearing confused, before trying to put his hand on the ashes. Raz grabbed it and pulled him away from the ashes. "Fire is bad. Never touch it," he repeated. Lith stared into his father's eyes like he was deeply in thought before asking, "Fire bad?" "Yes, very bad," Raz replied with a nod. "Okay," Lith said and moved away from the fireplace. He went to the table and tried to climb up a chair, almost falling with it. Elena came to his rescue. "Good gods, he sure likes danger," she said. Seeing their worried expressions, Lith thought of a way to end his torment. He kept putting himself in dangerous situations, like climbing on the table or going into the kitchen and rummaging through the pots and knives. His parents quickly decided that his adventure time was over. They made him sit on an old piece of cloth and gave him toys to play with. And they finally relaxed a little. Lith had a little wooden horse, some kind of cart, and an odd-looking dog toy. Playing was much easier for him. He didn't need to create stories or explain what he was doing. He also used this time to practice spirit magic. He didn't use his hands to move the toys, instead making them float as close as possible to his fingers to give the appearance he was touching them. Lith enjoyed those moments. He was finally able to rejoice, scream, and laugh any time he made a new discovery or breakthrough in spirit magic, and all his parents saw was a happy child playing with his toys. Who would have ever thought that such a quiet little fellow could have such a vivid imagination? Raz said proudly. Look at him. All he has is just some toys, yet it looks like he has the whole world in the palm of his hand. The following years weren't easy for Lith. He was finally able to ask plenty of questions, filling most of the holes in his vocabulary and learning about his family in the new world. He learned that the village where they lived was called Lutia, which belonged to the country of Lustria, itself a part of the Griffin Kingdom. His parents knew the names of the neighboring countries, but didn't care about the world outside their village. In their eyes, the king was a distant and mythical figure, and the real person of authority was Count Lark. He was the only one that administered justice, collected taxes, and was in charge of the village's affairs. He was also the guest of honor at Lutia's Spring Festival. Lith's parents never talked to him or his siblings about magic, wars, or general history. The only stories they told them were bedtime stories.